Everyone, we're back on the horse, bringing this horror show to the table. Yeah. So today we're going to be doing his face. Now, I had a good long hard think about how I want to approach this, but I think in a way, kind of the original way was best. There is, a bit of a quandary to decide upon when it comes to doing the skin on his face because it's a kind of large, important central feature, and I kind of thought long and hard, perhaps too long and hard about it. Probably did myself an injury. So yeah, I think Magos Purple with a bit of contrast medium to sort of like bring down the intensity is the way to go to give you that nice sort of weird pinkish Gene Stealer vibe without kind of overdoing it. Because I've seen versions where the paint job sort of de-emphasize the face because the face is ginormous, right? Face and head, of course, is kind of huge, and it kind of takes up prime real estate in the center of the Tyranid. So you're gonna need to decide how you want to treat this thing because it's such an important feature on the miniature, and I thought about it, and eventually I think the old ways probably are best. Sort of making him look like kind of like a regular kind of more human, more anthropomorphic creature, sort of crossed a little with a Gene Stealer. Some elements of that Gene Stealer look I think would do well to sort of bring across the full horror of a creature that's kind of living involuntarily between two worlds, as this poor chap definitely is. And I think the miniature goes a long way towards supporting this approach, because all these like stretched bits of skin that kind of give you that real body horror sort of vibe, I think really support this style of painting. So this is the first go with Magos Purple. I think we're just going to let it dry fully. Thankfully, Magos Purple with just a little bit of contrast medium dries pretty quick, which is great, which allows us to come in to build more layers of color. I'm just going in now to emphasize some of these strange details on the surface. And whoop, we got away from me there for a second. Noting that there are these interesting sort of like veins popping all over him. I might do them in more of a green. Yeah. I'm kind of calling him a him for now, but to be perfectly honest, this guy is an amalgam of the unknown and some poor horrific creature. So who on earth knows what this guy is supposed to be at this point? He's more an it than anything else, to be honest. And I think that the miniature sort of vibe generally is set by the way the face is painted. Over on the Facebook group for 2nd edition Warhammer, I've been asking which parts of the model are most challenging, if any. And along the way in the discussion, people had different opinions, but one thing that came up was there is a whole subject of bioplasma on this model, because this creature is supposed to be able to generate some kind of a latent psychic kind of, chemical psychic blast of some description. It's all a little bit eldritch and unknown, kind of awesome. And I'm wondering whether I can add a little bit of that into the way the mouth is painted, maybe give it a bit of a green glow or a green cast. Although the challenge is that I think because of the way this model's arms are arranged, quite a lot of real estate needs to be covered in green for it to work. So I'll have a think about that. But for now, I think we'll just get it done to what I would consider army book or codex level paint job, just focusing on the really interesting details. And maybe, in the future, we might do another model, another one of these guys in more of a sort of OSL kind of method. I like the idea of doing it in OSL, but not for the first time I'm painting this model. The first time I just want to recreate the original retro color scheme, maybe explore a little bit about sneaking in a bit of green here and there. But yeah, keeping it simple for the first model anyway. Great, that looks pretty good actually. So Magos Purple has this wonderful sort of fleshy pink undertone to the purple. It is very purple, but it's also got, when you thin it down, it reveals a lot more like pinkish and fleshy hues. So that's really useful for what we're trying to achieve here in painting our horrible hybrid creature. So as you can see, I'm letting it flow over into areas which are a bit adjacent, while carefully building up a little bit here along the brow line to emphasize that nasty crinkled forehead. I would imagine that being turned into an alien creature has imposed quite a bit of stress onto this poor chap, and he's kind of feeling it, if you know what I mean. It might be time to have a chat with Tyranid Hive Fleet HR, see if you can like negotiate a little bit of time off, because somebody is definitely needing a little bit of a mental health break. But unfortunately, such is life in the Tyranid Hive Fleet sometimes, especially if you're a Screamer killer. For the most part, the rest of the creatures don't appear to be quite as sentient as this poor chap. So there must be something about how the original creature that sort of involuntarily got volunteered his DNA to become a Screamer killer. Must have been. I imagine the creature must have been maybe a little bit paranoid to begin with. kind of like 40k Psyduck. Oh no. You turn a Psyduck creature into a Carnifex. You know, maybe. That's terrifying. Oh no. Yeah, I love this model, and I love the way this model's like bizarre design is making me think of ways to kind of bring out just the grotesque weirdness of it. Yeah, I feel like this model kind of fits quite poorly into the Tyranid range because he's got such a different design aesthetic, while still retaining enough links with just the original look that, you know, it's kind of on the cusp of perfection. It's just uncanny and weird enough even for a Tyranid creature without, you know, completely going off the rails. At the same time, it suggests enough of uniqueness to make you think a little bit about this poor chap's backstory. But I like the idea of angry mutant Psyduck. So yeah, it kind of took a real turn for the worse, you know, in like 4th edition when basically the plastic Carnifex box came out, and that really kind of went the way of looking like a giant gaunt or a giant Hormagaunt kind of look, which I guess, I mean, it's a look. There's nothing wrong with it, I suppose. It's just that it stopped being a special, unique thing and just became a particularly tough Tyranid. And I think maybe during that edition, I kind of saw too many of them, because at that point, I think the sort of Godzilla list became really popular for Tyranids, and unfortunately, everybody wanted in on it, to the point that, yeah, just dealing with multiple toughness 7 or 8 models was just ugh. It was just a bit of a chore, really, and kind of took away from the specialness of the individual Carnifex, I suppose. So that was a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. It's all a part of Warhammer history now, and I think he's looking like a handsome boy, if you could call him that. Yeah, so let's move on to a little bit more of the red. So a lot of his carapace is red, and I kind of need to decide on which bits are going to be red. Now that I look at it, this whole section of what I shall call chest bacon needs to be that Magos purple color as well, because it is almost certainly, almost invariably stretched skin over a bony carapace. Yum yum. Wonderful. So I will come back in with that in a bit, but for now I'll be happy to go ahead and define all of these ribcage bits. There's also the little sort of gribbly innards that are just visible inside his splayed out ribcage. So I think those bits would have to be maybe some kind of a green. That's maybe where we can think a little bit about how it applies to the sort of plasma irradiated innards that this poor friend has. If you think about it, this is a poster boy for space IBS. Or acid reflux, I guess. Acid reflux, the Tyranid. So yeah, lots of Pepto-Bismol in this poor chap's future. Maybe. Maybe that's all. That's all his species needed. Access to Pepto-Bismol on a cosmic horror level, and that might have settled some of his grievances. Maybe he'd be screaming a whole lot less. Terrifying when you think about it. Yeah, so cool. I'm going to go ahead and continue with the red and not scare you with terrifying discussions about bodily functions. And okay, trying to work out where his ribcage start and stop sometimes can be a bit challenging on this model because there's a lot of detail going on the surface, and it's not entirely 100% defined. But for the most part, this model has been quite the joy to paint. He's been really interesting, lots of fun textures to think about, and not the most complex. I think putting together this model was more painful than painting it. And I say that as if I've done the model already, but we are moving along at a fair clip, so I'm fairly confident about where he's heading. There comes a time when you've done enough of these models to know exactly how this model is going to turn out, even at this fairly early stage, and I think I really like the way it's going. There's a little bit of like, there are some areas which might be a little bit strange if treated in pure red, but I think just having a little bit of a good fade into the deeper areas would be a good way to treat those spaces. So I refer specifically about this louvered section behind. It appears to have some kind of like gribbly vent action going. Yeah, a little bit of a shallow texture, but it's okay. It will do. Unfortunately, with this model's age, you can sort of see some of the downsides associated with it being a giant metal model, which is that some of the gaps are really quite pronounced, unfortunately. But there's not a lot we can do about it at this point, other than to come back in and patch it in if it looks really, really bad. To be honest, those gaps are not entirely visible to me when I was assembling the model. But no harm, no foul. We can always come back and fix them later, now that we've spotted them. And we can adapt our strategy accordingly to get this guy on the table. Yep. So I think he's looking pretty handsome now. Most of the colors are kind of blocked in on the chest. Most of the rib cages, the rib cage singular. And now back to the Magos purple to fill in this space over here. More facial bacon. I'm coining that term for Tyranids now, for Carnifexes in particular, of this era. That is essentially facial bacon because it's so stretched, it's so striated. Kind of disgusting. But this poor guy is doing his best, living his best life as best he can, so we won't judge him for it. So we continue to drop a little bit more of this into the recesses, into this sort of ribbed under texture. And maybe let's do a bit on the back here as well. So it's got this series of bits, kind of like exposed sections of a prawn shell going down his back. An unpleasant image if you think about it too hard, but otherwise, I think from afar, these bits serve to break up the expanse of dark purple carapace, and will look pretty good once finished, in my opinion. So long as the Magos purple is not too intense as to completely fill in all of the detail here. These striations bring a lot to making the model look a lot more interesting. They add a lot to the look of it, and I think what I'll do after this is dry is to come in with another coat of Magos purple, but this time maybe concentrating only on the edges so that we have a little bit more of a defined outline for when it meets the rest of the purple. Cool. I think he's looking, to be honest, I think he's looking better than I expected. I did expect to have a little bit more of a struggle trying to get the right shade of purple, but it turns out Magos purple, as the name suggests, is perfect for Tyranids. Who would have thunk it? It's looking pretty good. And then now we go back to our bugbear purple, which is Hish purple. Hish is the law of death. Amethyst, ooh, there's a bit of a wormy there, so I need to fix that. Sorry guys, try to catch these more before getting to the painting stage in future, but sometimes it's just how it is. Yeah, so Hish is the law of death, amethyst magic, of purple son of Xerius fame. So yeah, I think I have achieved the right blend, which is a 1:1 mix with contrast medium. And now more of the rich purple colors are kind of showing through. I dare say I might be getting converted to liking this color now. Now, the question is just how on earth you use this color, because beyond painting the occasional Tyranid creature and Slaneshi demons, for example, it's pretty hard to find uses for this color. But I will not give up. I will persevere. I also have an interesting question to ask. I have managed to get hold of some second edition 40k Marines, and I'm wondering what chapter I should do it in. Everyone's, I mean, there've been lots of like really excellent paint jobs for 40k, single pose, monopose, like Space Marines already. People have done Lamenters, people have done Salamanders, people have done all sorts of Space Marines, but I just kind of wonder what color scheme I should use for the one that I intend to paint. Looking forward to it, or maybe I should just end up doing an entire swatch of them, which, to be honest, sounds pretty fun as well. Maybe to do like half a dozen of the more unusual colors. I mean, I've seen them painted as Rainbow Warriors, I've seen them painted as, all manner of colors, but I'm wondering whether I can come up with something unique or original. I haven't seen people do Iron Hands, but to be perfectly honest, Iron Hands are not the most interesting color scheme to do on a model that especially has so little going for it to start with, that a relatively drab color scheme might not work. Or I might just go absolutely apeshit and go for a Rogue Trader era kind of camouflage scheme. That might be fun as well. Make it my own like special legion or chapter, and just call it a campaign color scheme, because back in Rogue Trader, most Space Marines actually had campaign color schemes. They didn't wear their main chapter colors all the time. Sometimes if they were going for more of a stealth or more of a long-term campaign, they would actually do their armor in different colors as well, but they would retain a small section of their color scheme in their original chapter colors just to show their allegiance. And because, I would imagine the Marines are rightly proud of their heritage, so they would want to retain at least some aspect of their color scheme. But for the most part, they had a color scheme that was usually more appropriate for the kind of terrain that they were operating in. So, for example, if they were fighting on Catachan, more of a Death World jungle vibe, they would go for more greens, to be honest, and that might be a fun way to explore an interesting color scheme with some freehand patterning on the Marines' armor, so that would at least make them fairly unique. I've not seen many Marines painted in that style, mostly because it's kind of fallen by the wayside. Might be a fun one to do. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you have any desire to see any particular Marine chapter done that way, let me know, because I'm all for adding something new and different and creative to the world, and I would love to hear your opinions on what the 40k setting kind of wants to, or needs more of. I don't think it needs more Space Marines, but it needs more interesting sub-chapters or campaign colors, and just that sort of aspect that has kind of fallen by the wayside with modern 40k. Cool. So I'm going to jump in now and do his innards. So this is going to be Striking Scorpion Green, which is the most lurid green I could find in contrast paint, and I'm just going to slap it on into these recesses. sometimes when you apply it, it's possible to over apply as well, as was the case in this one. So it's important to wick up kind of the excess so that you continue to have that contrast look that you are looking for. Contrast paint would be quite pointless if you didn't manage to get the highs and lows, so that was in danger of drying all in one solid color because it had built up too much. So that's something that I find really important when trying to apply contrast paint. You want to always be eyeballing the finish without maybe poking and prodding at the surface as it dries too much, because that can cause tears in the surface. But to always sort of be wary of the kind of look that the model is tending towards, and lift off extra paint if needed, like I just did there. Wash it out and then come back in and lift off a little bit more. And you can actually do a bit of an almost like a faux highlight already when you do this correctly. Yeah, so I think it looks pretty good. I'm really liking his face, which is a bizarre thing to say about a Tyranid, but you know, there you go. His forehead thingy, there's a part of me that really wants to do it in a bone color, but I think that kind of goes against the principle of the weirdness of it. Also, I'm wondering what to do his teeth. So I think purple plus a bit of green might be just weird enough to have a sort of tinted gum line, something like that. Because while I get that most gums sort of read as pink, I kind of don't want that to be too pink as well. And then after that, there's a whole issue of what to do with the inside of his mouth. I think for now, I will go in with red, and then I will deepen it towards the recesses, because there is a bit of detail going on in there. There is a sort of like tongue and maybe some kind of an alien uvula, favorite word, hanging around in the depths of his throat. That's that funny dangling bit for all of you who, if you've ever wondered why you've got a punching bag hanging down the middle of your throat, that's your uvula. So yeah, meantime, a little bit more red wouldn't go amiss. And I can start to kind of flow gently into this arm. I don't know where I'll stop exactly with this session, but I know I at least want to get his face to a good stage, because that really helps me understand how the rest of the color scheme should flow. So I want to get at least his facial details done, but along the way I'll sneakily get a bit of progress on these arms as well. This model has been an absolute breeze to paint so far. It's only been 23 minutes. The time is just, you know, flying by. And this guy is starting to take on a little bit of his final appearance, which I am very pleased about. Right, so this bit over here, this under carapace, I imagine needs to be red as well. But I think what I will do, just to make him not look like a watermelon, is to just add successive layers of my red mix, which is again my usual Blood Angels red plus Gryphhound orange, for that kind of warm, very warm, intense kind of red. Is to just build it up over a few layers, maybe keep going at it until it is a little bit de-emphasized, because there is a danger with this model with just how much red on the surface there is, that he kind of looks a little bit strange. And I shouldn't have said the watermelon thing, because now that's all I can think about as far as his louvered chest is concerned. But there you go, sometimes 40k is as strange as it sounds. So watermelon boy is a thing. Cool. Right. So now his eyes. I'm going to grab a little bit of the purple, the heish purple, to darken his eye sockets. He actually does have eyes sculpted in, so that's kind of a good sign. But yeah, just to darken those eye sockets a bit. And then I need to come in with, I think, Skeleton Horde for his teeth, as well as his forehead thing. Another thing I regret talking about Pokemon about, Now that thing on his forehead now really reminds me of Mew. And now I feel like I might just have to do that in a kind of bone color as well, because the Mew references are a little bit too close. So let's do that. I'm gonna grab some skeleton horde. Sorry, don't mind me. Give me a second. Skeleton horde. And we're going to be using that for the teeth as well, so certainly no monotasker. Skeleton horde, just a really good color for adding in that warmth. There we go. I think that's looking pretty good. A little bit mewy, but that's okay. Entirely appropriate. Why did they give Mew a bizarre, New York accent? I never quite understood that. Let's just do his weird crotch thing as well. His little pelvic spur. It's the best way I can describe this weird shape. It's so cool though, this model. It's borderline Geiger in places, and I think that's why I really like sort of the vibe of this model overall. It's undoubtedly weird, but good weird, because they could have just made a giant xenomorph, but they decided to be a little bit more experimental with the proportions and sort of the links to whatever beastie this creature used to be genetically are still visible on the model, and that adds a new level of body horror to what is essentially a really strange looking beast to start with. And I really appreciate that level of detail and world building. So there. Cool. So now we're going to jump in with a bit of white. And I think selectively glaze some highlights onto the head, as well as this bizarre little hole over here. He's kind of got a little dimple there. I imagine it's some side effect of the casting process. But yeah. So I'm going to make sure this blends nicely. To give me a good smooth domed shape. Already with the contrast paint over the surface, I think I managed to achieve a decent feathered out blend, but I think when you add white to the Magos purple, you get a cleaner, more refined color, more towards pink, which I actually do enjoy quite a bit. So as you can see, having a lot of fun with this. I wonder also whether part of this was inspired a little bit by Dragon Ball. That forehead lozenge kind of reminds me of detail that you would find on Vegeta's armor. All of the myriad fascinating inspiration that must have gone into this chap. Or even an Egyptian cartouche. Those funny name plates that you get that sort of indicate the name of an important person. Egyptians used to use that sort of ovoid kind of carved shape to indicate that a section of hieroglyphs pertain to somebody's name. So like an important person. I guess it's the equivalent of in English how we capitalize the first word, the first letter of every word to indicate a proper noun. Capitalizing it helps it to stand out from among the mass of text. The Egyptians used that funny cartouche shape to indicate when a person's name put it in writing. And since most writing was performed by people who were close to, who were clearly well educated or who were close to kings, a lot of the surviving writing is found in temples, and therefore most of the names that appear in cartouches are those of kings or really important characters like viziers and so on. Yep, the real life Jafars of the world. Not to say that at that point Egypt was kind of Egypt wasn't Muslim at that point, but you get the idea. So yeah, that funny cartouche-like shape on the forehead. It's interesting to note that this is that period before Games Workshop had decided on the shared kind of design principles of Tyranids. All Tyranids, for example, are supposed to have 5 plates on the forehead. This guy clearly has one bizarre cartouche. So in that sense, those ground rules hadn't been laid down yet. 6 limbs, I believe, as well as 5 plates on the forehead. The rules that you're not supposed to break. I remember when I was a Games Workshop staffer back in the 2000s, there was a model that was released with an incorrect number of forehead plates, and I remember that got some of the old guard Games Workshop managers into a bit of a tizzy about design, and that was, I mean, I didn't care as much as the others did, but I think it was kind of a fun conversation to be privy to, listening to the old guard complain about how Games Workshop design had kind of fallen by the wayside, which believe me was happening at that point as it is now, because it turns out when you release a well-loved Demon Hunter miniature with gigantic pants, oversized diapers, everybody gets a little bit upset about it. And well, they should, because this stuff is expensive, this stuff is a luxury, and you're paying for the world building and the effort and design that goes into these models. So yeah, you should get annoyed, because you're annoyed because you care, right? If you were at the point of apathy, you would not care. And sometimes that's just how love manifests. Love of the fan base, love from the fan base, and that's entirely okay. Don't ever be shamed into being endlessly positive, because as it turns out, that's how disasters like Concord happens. Yeah. Oh well. Okay, rant over, I promise. So a little bit more Magos Purple as promised, to try to feather in the edges of the carapace, just to make the center look a little bit more special and interesting, and a little bit more on the bottom as well. And we're going along at a fair clip now to furnish these areas, and then we're moving in with a little bit more Hish Purple, just to make sure that the blotchiness that sometimes happens when you apply contrast that's been thinned down doesn't pop up too much to the eye, doesn't distract from the overall form. And now we're going to go with pure white to articulate his Mew forehead lozenge, his cartouche. So we're going straight to pure white to bring out the details, because we want this to stand out like crazy. There we go. I think that looks alright. Are there 10 of these? Maybe. Cool. Now we want to put a little bit of a dot for the eye. Small as we can make it. Because when you've got a dark sort of socket or eye sort of well, and you put the tiniest dot, it really kind of brings out a little bit of rage. And that's not perfect. We'll come in to fix that in a bit when it's dry. But yeah, the smaller you can make it, the angrier the animal looks, and that kind of really brings out that personality. So it's not that you're painting the pupil. What you're painting is the glint, the hard little reflective glint of a specular highlight on the pupil. Okay, good. So that's dry enough. maybe let's move on to a little bit more highlights for the Magos Purple first. Maybe over here, because I can see that my red got a little bit overzealous. So getting these heads to fit, because it's hard to tell from the picture, but the top half of the head and the bottom half of the head were separate pieces, and that's just really hard because to match, because some of the mouth bacon on this Carnifex was disrupted by that connection point, so that wasn't ideal. So I had to go in with a little bit of green stuff to try to blend it in, but I'm not sure I've got it absolutely perfect. But hopefully with paint it becomes a little less obvious where the connection point is. I think it's a little bit more obvious on this right side. If it really bothers me, I might come in to fix it a little bit more. But there you go. Just the distortion of the mold made it so that the top and bottom jaws don't align quite correctly. There's not a lot we can do about that, unfortunately, but we can do our best to get the right idea across. So just mixing a bit more Magos Purple to blend in that really harsh highlight on top of the head. And I find myself going back over and over to add more brightness to the top of the head, because I think that's a major focal point for this miniature. And this is one of the challenges with doing a sequential highlight, where you add more and more increasingly over time, because the original highlight wasn't quite strong enough to carry the visual importance. I think that's okay, not too bad. Okay, so now we're going to go in with a little bit of Ildari Emerald, because we want to define these veins a little bit more. I'm going to be continuing them a little bit past the original sculpt. Your guess is as good as mine as to what is actually flowing through this. But if this guy is kind of being fed by blood that's not entirely his own, then I would imagine that a weird alien color for the blood sounds kind of right. As it turns out, a lot of crustaceans, I know this guy isn't a crustacean, but you know, the crabbiness of it is immaculate. The crabby parallels. But a lot of crabs have actually got blue blood, crabs and cephalopods. In particular, horseshoe crabs have blue blood. There's something to keep you thinking. Because they do in fact have a non-iron, they don't have their blood that's not iron based. Our blood is red because it's got hemoglobin, which is an iron compound, kind of like an oxidized iron, kind of like rust in a way, which is why rust also has an orange sort of hue, right? When iron gets compounded with water, H2O, it tends to sort of go a little bit into the reddish spectrum. Not always, but sometimes, and often enough that we can observe this in rusty objects around us. And then when it comes to crustaceans, in particular things like horseshoe crabs and cephalopods, which are not crustaceans but they're mollusks, but you get the idea. They have blue blood. So green blood is not out of the ordinary, I would imagine. Okay, coming in with a bit of black to fix that eye. Deep breath. And there we go. Cool. So they are roughly similar in size, which is what we wanted. And then we're going to add a bit of white to our Hish purple, and we're out of Hish purple. Great. I'm so happy that I'm finally using this stuff. Finally found a purpose for it. A bit more. That, to be honest, is more than enough to turn it into practically black. This is a ridiculous color, guys. Anyway, so let's mix up a highlight with a bit of white and sort of just run it around the edge. Like so. Just give it a kind of a pronounced ridge around the outside. And on the inside edge, as well as this little area that I kind of scratched off from earlier, a bit of emphasis around those funny little ridges. Would help to define that a little bit more, to give it a little bit more clarity and readability for what is essentially an extremely dark section of the model. And yep, let's do some around the base of this on the back as well, just to make sure those are nice and clean. Currently they're looking a bit raggedy. That's just how the Hish purple works. So yeah, still not my favorite color in the world. The pigment's a little bit all or nothing. When you try to cut it with say white, it kind of goes black instantly, or else after a few drops it kind of turns into a desaturated gray, which is not a terrible thing. It's just not the most versatile color, but at least it's finding use on this model. It's finding a home on this model, and I dare say it's looking pretty good in conjunction with the other very, very bright colors like the red and that crazy squid pink head on his dome. There we go. This highlight's practically gray, but that's a good indication of how little purple there actually is in Hish purple. The color is mostly almost like an oily black when applied neat from the bottle, and I don't see how that really works with their original plan for one coat out of the bottle. But hey, we found a way, and I am hard pressed to see actually what color might replace Hish purple. Now that I've given it a shot on this Carnifex, I think it's kind of helped to achieve the iconic look. It's always remarkable to me how you can go through the Games Workshop paint range and find colors that are able replacements for colors that were used way in the past. So I would have imagined with the old like Games Workshop paint ranges, or at least those which were, you know, around at the time of the Carnifex, of this Carnifex, and this was in stores, they would probably have indicated that you needed to mix black with leech purple, which was the darkest purple of the day. Leech purple was more of a sort of medium purple, that kind of purple that you get when you mix roughly 50-50 magenta and teal and cyan, sorry, not teal. Yeah, so I would imagine you would have had to mix this, but this Hish purple is kind of almost exactly the color that I need for this, and that's kind of remarkable. Quite interesting indeed. Okay, so I think he's coming along nicely. I think a little bit more green for his eyes to match his chest cavity. Sir, multiple chest cavities. It's okay if it flows a little bit out. It's alright. He's looking like a handsome boy. And then his teeth, which I think require a little bit more definition. So I'm grabbing a bit of black and I am lining the spaces in between his teeth. It's okay if they look a little bit weird and spaced out. That's essentially Tyranids in a nutshell, weird and spaced out. Yum, 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 yum. And teeth. And mouth. And a little bit of his cartouche. I'm just going to go with cartouche from now on. I'm just going to assume that all Carnifexes wear their name tags on their foreheads. So neatening up the black. And I think that looks alright for now. Okay, I think that looks alright. A little bit of orange to kind of lift some of the edges. And I think we're coming very close to that part of our episode where we talk about leaving the next, like something for us to do tomorrow. Because as much as this guy, as much as I could keep painting this guy, I kind of want to not rush it as well. And I want to pace this guy up because I'm enjoying painting him so much. This is clear orange from Vallejo. It's a great kind of blazing orange color. If any of you remember blazing orange, this is a pretty decent analog for that color, where the orange is still very close to red, but has enough yellow in it to function as an early stage highlight. Really effective at popping, and yet is visibly discernible as orange, which is, I think, something that the highlighting of this area really leaned into. The reds usually did end up around yellow, passing through orange, and that was just the way people painted back then. Never mind if the final model kind of sometimes read a little bit more like orange than they did red. It was all part of the look. So a little bit more red to sort of blend in some of the areas, and I think we are ready to call it. So guys, thanks for joining me. I've really enjoyed painting this model up until this point, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to bring this guy to life. Such a privilege to paint this model, such an iconic piece, and I hope you're really enjoying the ride so far. Sorry, one little bit for his upper lip. It's not working. There we go. Okay, cool. I think he looks pretty good. Alright guys, we're gonna call it here. I hope you enjoyed watching so far. You can really get a sense of where the miniature is really heading right now. I think he's looking pretty good. We'll add a little bit more detail to the back of his head, so not to worry. But for now, you can sort of see his mighty gurn. It's terrifying. Alright, cheers. Have a good one.